Today's daf is daf Pei Zayin. So the Gemara asks the following question. On the bottom of daf Pei Vav Amud Beis, the Gemara explains that from the pasuk Osa, we derive the conclusion, according to the Chachamim, that the hafara is only chal if he knows exactly to whom he's to whose neder he's being made for. For Gabi Kroim, but with regard to the din of Kriya on Begadim, where it says in the parasha of Misas Shaul, Tichsiv al, it says with regard to David that he was Korea Begadov, because it's a din of Kriya even al Rabo Muvak. And here on the Melech for sure, it says, Al Shol the Al Yonasan Beno. Why don't we derive the following conclusion? That it's got to be Al Shol the Al Yonasan. That a person, when he's Mekayim the mitzvah of Kriya on his Begadim, he's got to know exactly which mess. And the halach is not like that. V'sanya Omrulo Shemes Aviv V'kara Yakat Nimsa Beno Yotzi de Kriya. Here, he was of the opinion that his father had died, and he was Korei L'Shem, his father. And now he finds out it was Beno, and yet, despite that, the Brisa establishes that he has fulfilled his mitzvah. He doesn't need a separate additional Kriya to replace the first one. So we see that even though it says the word Al, and it says it twice, he doesn't have to be Koreh Dafka L'Shem Oso Hames. So why is it going to be our first Nedarim? The Mishnah establishes that the word Osa teaches us that the Hafara has to be for the purpose of that woman, and he's got to know for whose neder he was made for. Amri Lokasha, the Gemara reconciles this apparent contradiction of Bistam v'Hod b'Mefarich. The question is, how was he notified? And there are two possibilities. There could be stam, where they would notify him that somebody died, or somebody took a neder, or b'mefarish, they notified him mistakenly about the wrong person. And that's going to be the difference in this teretz of the Gemara, before we get to Rashi, between the Mishnah and here in Nedarim and the Brisa of Kriya. Here, in the case of Nedarim, the reason why the hafara is invalid is because they specifically misled him, not deliberately necessarily, but b'mefarash, they told him that his wife had taken the neder. He was made for it for his wife. And it turns out that it wasn't his wife who took the neder, but rather his daughter. In the parallel sense, the same din would apply to Kriya. If, let's say, they told him his father died and he was Korei L'Shem, his father, he finds out later that it wasn't his father, it was Beno, he has to do another Kriya. However, this Brisa, which establishes that he has fulfilled his mitzvah of Kriya, is talking about a case where they told him that somebody died bistam. They didn't tell him explicitly who died. He himself came to the wrong conclusion in his mind that he was probably being Korea al-Avi. And in this particular case, in Hafaras Nedarim, if they had told him that we don't know who took the neder, but it was either your wife or your daughter, that's called stam, he himself came to the conclusion that it was his daughter, that hafara is valid. For Tanya, I'll prove it to you from a Brisa. Omrulo, they told the person, Mace Aviv. So here they were outspoken, that's called Mefarish. And they told him his father had died V'kara. Now V'yakat Nimtza Beno. So he did the Kriya based on the Hodah that they were Modia him. They notified him that his father died. He did the Kriya L'Shem, his father, Lo Yotzi, they Kriya, he has to do a repeat Kriya to replace the first Kriya, because it turns out that it was his son Nebuch who died. Amru Lo, On the other hand, if they said Meslo Mes, which means the stam, Ukesover, he himself came to the conclusion that it was Avihu, it was his father who died. The Korah has begun of Yakach Nimtza Beno, Yotze Yedei Kriya, he has fulfilled his mitzvah Kriya, and the parallel halach would apply Tafar. So we see that the way in which he was notified, the notification plays a major role. However, the Gemara now quotes another approach to explain the difference between Kriya in the Bryce of Kriya and Afara in the Mishnah here regarding Afara. Rav Ashi Omer, Kan, B'soch Kidei Dibur. Kan refers to one case in which they were Modialo. So they mistakenly notified him that it is his son who died. And then, Toch Kidei Dibur, I'm sorry, let's take the other case. They notified him that his father died. So he was Korea al Avi. Then B'soch Kidei Dibur, they told him that it wasn't your father who died, but rather it was your son who died. And in such a case, because he changed his kavana in the kriya, Toch Kidei Dibur of the actual kriya, then we link together the time after, within Toch Kidei Dibur, after his original kriya, his original Maisa, as if we could push it back to the moment of the Maisa kriya. So the Maisa kriya, now he finds out that it was his son. That Maisa kriya is now related to his son. But Khan, if let's say after he was Korea al Aviv, a Toch Kidei Dibur period passed already, and after the kriya, let's say 4 seconds passed, and now they notify him that it was really his son who died, then he would have to do another kriya, repeat kriya. And this is how Rav Ashi explains his distinction. Hadikamer Yotzi de kriya. When is it that even though he was mistaken about his kriya, he was Yotze? He went ahead and he did a kriya thinking it was for his father, and it turned out to be his son. But when did he find out? And he was notified that it was really his son, Toch Kidei Dibur, immediately following the kriya al Aviv. And in that case, his kriya relates to his son, because now within Toch Kidei Dibur of his kriya, he found out it was his son who died. And he's Yotzi de kriya, there's no need for a repeat kriya. The Amit lo yotza. When does the Brisa hold that he has to do a repeat kriya? That's when he finds out about his mistake. Liachar Kidei Dibur. He was Korel Aviv, Kidei Dibur passed, and now they tell him, hey, my friend, your kriya was al Aviv, but in truth your father's alive and well. Nebuch would know. How long is Toch Kidei Dibur? That's Kidei She'elas Talmid L'Rabo Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umori. So we see here in this sugya that the halacha Toch Kidei Dibur is not just halacha in Chazara. Normally, when we see Toch Kidei Dibur, it's halacha in Chazara, which means that we give a person those few seconds to change his mind, to rescind his original position. Let's say he agreed to sell his field, he can change his mind and rescind his das. Or let's say he took a shvua, he could change his mind with Toch Kidei Dibur. In this sugya, Toch Kidei Dibur works in a different way. It takes two events and combines them together as if they had taken place simultaneously. And therefore, his kriya and his new hodah, which straightens out the record as to who actually died, are mitzuraf, are connected to one split second in time, such that now the new yediyah that he finds out, Toch Kidei Dibur, the kriya, will impact on the kriya itself. Now, if we take Rav Ashi and we apply this to Nedarim, a man was Mayfair his wife's neder, thinking it was his wife's neder, when in truth it was his daughter's wedding. He finds neder, and he finds out that it was his daughter's neder toch k'dei dibur of his hafara. Then again, we're going to connect these two events as if they were simultaneous. And now his hafara, which initially was l'shem neder ishto, is now chal with regard to neder bito. But if he only finds out that it was a mistake, that it wasn't his wife who took the neder, but rather it was his daughter, he finds out after Tokidei Dibur, then the hafara will not be meaningful with regard to his daughter's neder. And the Gemara wants to prove this with the following brayso. Batanya, Mishi yesh lo chola b'sofei, so minas aleph, u'kimedume shemes. The impression was that the chola had already died. He actually fainted, but he was still alive, but they took him for dead. And once that happened, Vikara, he renders his garments, and then he finds out that at the moment that he did the kriya, the chola, his relative, was still alive. The achar kach mes, and subsequent to his kriya, the person, the relative, died. Lo yatzidei kriya, because that kriya was at the time of while the person was still alive. But Amrav Shimon Pasi Amrav Shimon Levi Shabbat Kapolo Shanu El Shemes Liachak Levi. So there were a few seconds left to the person's death, and if he did the kriya and the death actually took place, and they determined the moment of death to be Liachak Levi of his kriya, then, as we saw in the Tanakama, it's Lo Yotzi De Kriya. However, if Avol V'Tokadei Dibur, if the death was determined to have taken place immediately after the kriya, Tokadei Dibur the kriya, then it's as if the death and the kriya took place both simultaneously, because as we said before, Tokadei Dibur combines two actions together and makes them simultaneous. However, there are three exceptions to the rule. So if a person nevertheless makalas Hashem, and then he decides that he wants to rescind that and change his mind, his chazara is not meaningful. There is no din of Tokadei Dibur, and therefore he's chayav misa. And also a person who says about a deity, about a Pesach, Eliata, and then he changes his mind, Tokadei Dibur, he's still going to be chayav misa. Umekadish, Megarish, he was Mekadish and Isha, then he says, you know what? Forget about it. I'm not interested. I made a boo-boo. Or he was Megarish, his wife, and then he says, no, I made a mistake. And all of his chazara, both in Kiddushin and Megarish, were Tokadei Dibur, Eno Yochel Lachsid. The halacha of chazara Tokadei Dibur does not apply in these cases. And what that means is that although Tokadei Dibur allows us to bridge the gap, the time gap between two events, events A and event B, but nevertheless, there are certain meisim which automatically generate a chalos din, whether it's a chiyuv misa, whether it's a chalos ishus or a chalos hafkas ishus. And these are the three exceptions to the rule. The Ran writes that the reason why a person cannot be chosed from these three cases is because there's absolute gemiras das at the time of the Maisa. So it means that Tokadei Dibur allows a person a little bit of time to change his mind. But in these three cases, he doesn't leave any room for changing his mind. He made an absolute, total, and unconditional decision that he wants to go through with this. So therefore, when he's closer both from Giduf from Ovei Kochavim, Avodah Zarah, or Gittin v'Kedushin, that Chazara is meaningless. And that is because he made a total decision. So it seems from this Gemara that the halacha tokidei dibur is halacha in Chazara predicated on the fact that he didn't make a full decision. And he allowed himself a little bit of time to change his mind, which is very different from the way we understood tokidei dibur in the case of Kriya. We didn't think it had anything to do with his mindset and whether he's changing his mind. We thought it has to do with creating a simultaneity between two events, as if to say the Kriya took place after his relative died, or the Kriya took place after or simultaneous with the notification as to who actually died in truth. So I'm not sure exactly how to reconcile these two Gemaras, because in Chazara we're talking about a question of das. Did he have a Gemiras das? Did he not? And we say that within Tokidei Dibur, his das is still sort of up in the air. He hasn't yet made a definite, absolute decision. But the previous sugya about Kriya, that has nothing to do with das. That has to do with what was the nature of the Kriya. Was it a Kriya al Aviv or a Kriya al Beno? And that depends on Tokidei Dibur. And B'dochak, what I would say is that to reconcile these two halachas, it would mean that Kriya has to have a kavanah. And although it's not like Gittin and Kedushin where you need das, but maybe it's similar to Megadeh or Oved Avodas Kochavim, where all you need is kavanah. And now the question is, when he had kavanah in this Kriya for Aviv, did he allow himself a little bit of room, a time lapse, to decide that the kavanah can be altered? And that's also a halacha of Chazara. But since we say in Kriya he didn't have a full-fledged kavanah, or alternatively, maybe there's a halacha of tos in kavanah, and therefore Tokidei Dibur operates. But again, it's very difficult to say tos, because if it's tos, then it wouldn't make any difference whether it was Tokidei Dibur that he found out about his mistake, or liachar Tokidei Dibur. And not only that, if there's halach of tos, then who says that tos allows us to substitute and plug in another kavanah to replace the kavanah mutes? And now we move on to the Mishnah on the bottom of page Zayin. Omra konem te'enim v'anov meila elu shani toemes. She took one single neder that included both figs and grapes. And now the Mishnah wants to suggest the question whether kiyum haneder has to be on the entire neder, or it can be mekayim only part of the neder. Kiyum l'te'enim, if he only was mekayim the neder for te'enim, kulo kaya. It is if he was mekayim the entire neder. And he won't have the ability and the rights to be made for the neder, even with regard to a novice. So the kiyum somehow spreads and encompasses the entire neder, both te'enim, which he was mekayim explicitly, and anovim, which is part of the same neder. We'll soon see the Mishnah can talk about a case where he took two independent nedarim, she took two, one for te'enim, one for anovim. Now the Mishnah goes on to ask the same question that we addressed in Kiyum Neder, in Afaras Neder. Hefer l'te'enim ve'enim mufar ad sheyofer af l'anov. Can we say that the Hafara on part of the Neder therefore spreads to encompass the entire Neder? And if he was Mefer with regard to te'enim, he doesn't want her to be enjoined from eating te'enim, but he said nothing about anovim. Here the halach is different. Eino Mufa, a partial hafara, in which he takes a segment of the neder and he's made for the neder, that's not a valid hafara at all. And therefore the neder will still be in its full validation, both with regard to Anovim, which he wasn't made for, but even with regard to Ta'edim that he was made for. So with regard to Kiyum HaNeder, Kiyum B'Miktas automatically generates a Kiyum on the entire Neder. With regard to Hafara, the opposite is true. Hafara B'Miktas does not register at all, and the Neder has not been impacted whatsoever. However, the Mishnah concludes with a case where Anovim and Tatum were two separate Nedarim. Omra Konam Ta'ena Shani Toemes. Ve'anova Shani Toemes. So notice that here the Shani Toemes was mentioned twice, whereas in the Reisha, she added Ta'enim and Anovim into the cholent, into the pot, and then Eini Toemes, which combines Ta'enim and Anovim, integrates into one neder. But here she had a Shani Toemes and another Shani Toemes. Each one generates a separate neder. And therefore the Mishnah Paskins are Elu Shnei Nedarim, and the Baal could be Mefer or be Mekayim, each one of these Nedarim as he chooses, and it'll be a valid hafara, let's say for Ta'edim, if he doesn't want the neder on Ta'edim, and the neder on Anovim will still be chal. Mani Masnisan, the Gemara wants to know to whom can we attribute the Mishnah with regard to hafara, that ein hafara l'chatzoyin, that if he was made for only part of the neder, the hafara is not valid at all. And the Gemara says that's Rabbi Shmuel, whose shita is formulated by the Brisa. What does it say in the Brisa? We're going to dash in the pasuk in Bamidbar Lamed pasuk Yudalid. Isha yikimena, Isha yifeirenu. Now the emphasis here is on yikimena. It doesn't say Isha yakim osa as it does in other psukim, or yafer osa. It says yikimenu. And then it says Yifeirenu. And we derive from this that Omra Konam Ta'enim Anovim Elu Shani Toemes. Again, it was one indivisible neder, a konam, that integrated both Ta'enim and Anovim. Kiem L'Ta'enim Kulo Kaim. Yikimenu is interpreted as meaning Yakim Mimenu. You're splitting the word into two, and the mem in the middle of these two words goes in both directions, as if it said Yikimenu with two mems. So you read it Yikim, and then Mimenu. Mimenu means part of it. And from this we derive the conclusion that the Baal could be Makayim, part of the neder. And in such a case, once the neder has been Mekuyam, then the kiyum is chal vis-a-vis the entire neder. And that's based on a principle of batul miksasa batul kula. But in the case of hafara, we don't have that extra yikimenu yefeirenu. And for some reason, the Drush of Rabbi Shmuel does not say yefeirenu, meaning a segment of the neder, but yefeirenu is interpreted as a hafara on the entire neder. So that whereas yikimenu is interpreted as menu, meaning ni menu, part of it, but not all of it. Like the Gemara says with regard to tefillin, just to give an example, it says miyomim yomima. So the mi tells us part of yomim, below kol yomim, to exclude Shabbos and Yom Tov from tefillin. So mi menu here means from part of the neder, and he was making part of the neder, and that's fine. The neder is batel. I'm sorry, the neder is makuyim. But in the case of hafara, we're interpreting yifirenu as meaning he has to be made for the entire neder.